Welcome to this clip on the fundamental principles which national courts must take into account when enforcing EU law and more specifically EU state aid law. After this clip, you will have a solid understanding of these general principles which are crucial to understand how national courts enforce EU state aid law. We will dive into the principles of direct effect, primacy, sincere cooperation, national procedural autonomy, equivalence, effectiveness, and to conclude, effective legal protection. We start off with one of the cornerstones of EU law, the principle of direct effect, as laid out by the European Court of Justice in the pivotal case of Van Gent and Loos. If an EU norm has direct effect, it confers rights on individuals which national courts are bound to enforce. A provision of EU law has direct effect if it is clear and precise, unconditional, and does not give member states substantial discretion in its application. Notably, the standstill obligation under Article 108, paragraph 3, TFEU has direct effect, which allows interested parties to seek legal protection against a violation of the standstill obligation before the national courts. However, it is well established that the standstill obligation only has vertical direct effect, which means it can only be invoked against member states and not against other parties, such as the beneficiaries of unlawful state aid. Moving forward, Commission recovery decisions also exert a vertical direct effect, meaning that the non-compliance of these decisions can be invoked against the member state concerned. The obligation to recover, as stipulated in a recovery decision, is exclusively directed towards the member state to which the decision is specifically issued, therefore it serves at most a declaratory purpose regarding involved beneficiaries. Transitioning to the principle of primacy, as articulated by the European Court of Justice in the landmark Costa NL judgment, affirms the precedence of EU law over national law, including both primary and secondary EU sources. The principle of sincere cooperation, as enshrined in Article 4, paragraph 3 TEU, provides that the EU and the member states shall, in full mutual respect, assist each other in carrying out tasks which flow from EU law. Pursuant to this principle, member states must refrain from taking measures contrary to EU law. This principle also requires member states, including their national courts, to interpret national law compliant to EU law. Moreover, the principle requires member states, including their national courts, to disapply national legal norms that are incompatible with an EU norm having direct effect. Delving into procedural aspects, in the absence of EU legislation on this matter, member states have the autonomy to determine how their national courts fulfill their duties arising from the treaties. However, it is essential that the rules they establish do not compromise the effectiveness of EU law. Member states thus hold the authority to designate which national courts are competent to hear state aid cases. Besides this, member states can decide which national remedies are available under national law for interested parties to obtain legal protection against breaches of EU law, including violations of the standstill obligation. Ensuring consistency, the principle of equivalence mandates that rules on how national courts enforce similar EU and national claims must be equally favorable. The EU principle of effectiveness prohibits member states to adopt or implement national legal rules that undermine the effectiveness of EU law, for example by making it extremely difficult or impossible to enforce rights derived from EU law. In practice, it will be up to the national courts to judge, on the basis of this EU case law, whether a national rule is incompatible with the EU principle of effectiveness. National courts can seek advice from the Commission and/or the Court of Justice in this regard. Finally, the principle of effective legal protection, enshrined in Article 47 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, provides that parties which enjoy EU law-based rights must have access to an effective legal remedy to find legal protection against alleged violations of this right. In summary, this clip covered 7 general principles applicable in situations where a national court enforces EU law, thus also in state aid cases. We went over the principles of direct effect, primacy, sincere cooperation, national procedural autonomy, effectiveness, equivalence, and effective legal protection. This brings us to the end of the clip on the fundamental principles national courts must consider when enforcing EU law in state aid cases. Thank you for your interest and attention.